Chapter 5, Part 2 is really a continuation of Part 1. Part 1 we talked about microevolution, which is a change in frequency of gene pool. Part 2 is really into speciation, which is macroevolution, which is a more controversial form of evolution. This is when two species can arise from one. Members of the can no longer breed together or reproduce or produce species rather that can reproduce, and I'll take you through the factors that can lead to that. So this is the making of a new species, and remember, a species is defined not only by our chromosome number, but whether we can reproduce together or not. Just one example, and one of the first parts of something called allopatric speciation is geographic isolation. We know that at one time there was an early fox population. Some of the fox population went north, some went south. They went their separate ways. The northern population adapted to the cold through a heavier fur, short ears, short legs, short nose rather, white fur matches the snow for camouflage. So what happened with that is kind of an idea of natural selection, where the Arctic fox that had the white color gene for fur actually survived because it blended in with its environment, and then it reproduced over millions of years. The one that went south was the gray fox. It adapted to the heat through lightweight fur and long ears, legs, and nose, which gave off more heat. So what happened is the ones that particularly was adapted to the more heat, obviously in the south, the ones that had those genes that could help it survive are the ones that were able to reproduce, and it just kept reproducing over many generations. Eventually, if that Arctic fox and gray fox got back together, they would not be able to reproduce together because of just differences. So what happens, we're talking something called allopatric speciation, is first of all there needs to be a geographical barrier. This could be because of earthquakes, this could be because of volcanoes or uplift of mountains, tectonic plates coming together, whatever the case may be. This could have been from like Pangea, which is the splitting of the continents. Geographically, species are isolated. So again, this is allopatric speciation. First, geographical isolation. It could be a migration, it could be a natural change. The migration was the example of the foxes, where some went north, some went south. And then what happens is we have, they've been apart, they've changed so much that we have reproductive isolation. Mutation, natural selection take over. We get divergence, so they diverge. If something diverges, it goes in its own separate ways. Huge difference within species over time, can't reproduce anymore, and we have two new complete species. An example, of course, is Pangea, as I mentioned before. As you can see, and we've got fossil records of this region right here. There's fossil records in Africa right here and in South America right there that match up. For lizards, what happened at one time is when they were together, they were all happy, and then of course these continents started splitting again over millions, if not, yeah, it's actually 225 million years as it indicates here. And what happens is now we see those fossil records here and here that match, but what happens is we've got a geographical barrier that separated those two. So if those two species were to get back together, of course there's no way they could reproduce. Sympatric speciation is a little bit different. This is when new species, they're together, there's no geographical separation, but they can't interbreed together anymore. There may be significant mutations in one, behavior differences, very rare, occur. Extinction, of course, when a population cannot adapt quick enough to changing conditions. There's many theories, of course, how the dinosaurs became extinct. Maybe it was a major climate change, maybe an increase in CO2. They couldn't migrate fast enough, they couldn't evolve fast enough. Regardless, we had a mass. We know that throughout geological time we are going to have mass extinctions. You can see right here, about 250 million years ago, of course, we had a mass extinction. At the end of the Jurassic period, we had, at the end of the Cretaceous period right here, we had a mass extinction too. That's when all the dinosaurs became extinct. And the good thing about that, as I mentioned in the part one, is that we then have the ability for new species to evolve because there's limited competition, there's lots of resources. Environmental changes really can drive a lot of these extinctions. Background extinction is when a species will disappear at a low rate. That's a very natural process that occurs. we do have mass extinctions. That is something that needs to be on a global scale, and that's example is the dinosaurs. It's catastrophic when we have anywhere from 25 to 70%, which is a huge range of species are lost. Mass depletion is extinction rates are higher than normal. We're seeing mass depletion rates, particularly in our tropical regions right now, and a lot of that is due to human effects of deforestation. The number one reason species become extinct is due to habitat destruction. Adaptive radiation, recovery periods after mass extinctions, generally large rate of speciation. So what happens is, again, when the dinosaurs died out, mammals had started to evolve before then, but what happened is when the dinosaurs died out, there was very little competition, so us mammals just expanded. Very important formula there, speciation minus extinction equals biodiversity. So the number of species that are created minus those that become extinct give us our current planet biodiversity. And remember, the greatest biodiversity is in the equatorial regions, and it decreases toward the poles. Humans are causing premature extinction. At current rate predicted, we will lose half of the present species now on the Earth, and we are degrading ecosystems that would support new speciation. I have a problem with this because a lot of those new species could be potential medicines or potential areas of research that can help us human species. Maybe there's a cure for cancer out there in the tropical rainforest, for example, that lies in a beetle that may not have even been discovered yet, and that beetle may become extinct before we can get that cure for cancer or heart or the like. Future of evolution, obviously nobody knows where it's going to go. Artificial by humans, we've been doing artificial selection rather, or selective breeding for years. We breed together two animals, for example, that we like. Maybe producing a mule, for example, which are very hard-working creatures. We've been doing that for thousands of years. That's artificial selection. We artificially select our horses. The horse that wins the Kentucky Derby is going to be worth lots and lots of money because it'll breed and pass ideally on its strong genes. We've been breeding dogs and cats for years, obviously, too, to get what we want. We do this with not only animals, but we do this with plants, too, to get the ideal foods that we want. Genetic breeding, huge area. In the recent probably 30, 40 years, gene splicing. What's really cool about that with genetic engineering is we can cross the species barrier. We can take genes from one species and put it into another. So you could take some trait out of your cat and put it into humans just by manipulating our DNA. Of course, a lot of that we don't quite have the technology to, but the idea is there. And that actually creates what's called the transgenic organism. Cloning, huge ethical issues that come into cloning. Biofarming is the idea that what we do is we create organs that, like in pigs, for example, that humans would take out for benefit. Genetic engineering, as of this past few years, has really become extremely controversial. A lot of the plants that we eat, like corn and bananas, are genetically modified to make them sweeter and last longer on the shelves and things like that. What we're seeing is, particularly in Europe, which is a little bit more advanced than the United States, in their thinking, like in Turkey, for example, this past year, Turkey actually destroyed all their genetically modified organisms because what was happening is it was causing allergies in people. It also was causing a lot of their bees to die out too, and bees are needed to pollinate. What was happening was one of the common genetic engineering things is to take a gene out of the tobacco plant that is a natural pesticide and to put it into another plant, and then we don't have to spray pesticides and things to get rid of bugs. Well, that gene was causing all sorts of problems within the human population too, and we're just kind of reaching the surface on that research, and I'm sure there's more to come too. So a lot of countries are going back. We're dropping genetic engineering and going back to the originals. So a lot of controversial that comes into play with that. Hey, that's the end of Chapter 5. Hopefully you got a little bit out of it, a little bit review from biology, but you'll see it on the test soon. Take care.